Christmas Eve is upon us, and we have some wonderful music with which to usher it in. Though of course we'll be singing many beloved and well-known carols, the choir will also be sharing some new works. One of these is There Is No Rose of Such Virtue, a medieval poem set by composer Melinda Bargreen. I had the pleasure of recently speaking with Melinda about her music. I'm here with Melinda Bargreen, whose composition There Is No Rose, the Choir of St. David's will perform at our 9:30 Prelude of Carols before our late Christmas Eve service. Melinda, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today about your piece.
It's a pleasure.
So I wanted to open it up first to ask you about your compositional career, because you're coming from being a music critic, from as far as I understand, and I'd be interested to hear what drew you to composition and how this came about.
Well, it's kind of a long and funny story. I started out as a real music kid. We got a piano when I was 4, and I immediately, launched onto the piano and lodged onto the piano, and fortunately was given lessons, and I was the good pianist in the crowd, sort of, so to speak, all the way through school. And then I started writing little pieces for the chorus and little pieces for the band and things like that at the same time when I was in high school. So I thought that was going to be the direction that I took, and it turned out not to be.
Mm-hmm.
I went off to college and took a big sort of right turn and ended up in the fields of literature, and which I got very engaged in, and a lot of it was medieval English literature, which really spoke to me, and the lyrics, the poems, people like Chaucer, of course, who was the towering giant of that time, and that I just progressed with that, and it was congenial and fun, and I kept playing and occasionally composing, but most of my energy was focused on academia. I ended up getting a doctorate from the University of California, Irvine, in English literature, and I taught for a while at varying institutions, but never really found a place that I thought was the right place for me, that was congenial, was a good place to teach, and wanted me, and I wanted them. And so ultimately, what happened was I got a job writing for the Seattle Times, more or less on a fluke. I had read a review in another newspaper that was really awful and offered my services to the other newspaper, and they said, okay, what would you have written? And I wrote, and then that job ultimately led to a much bigger job at the Seattle Times, where I was for 31 years. And they were wonderful times for arts journalism, not like today. And I got sent everywhere from, England, Germany, Russia, regularly to the opera in leading centers in the U.S. And it was a great time for newspapers and a wonderful time to be a critic. I had a great lot of fun. However, if you are the reigning critic in Seattle, you are also not having your work performed. Right. The conflict of interest issues are very obvious. And so that was just a big, long, fat hiatus where I really wrote very little because there was no hope of getting it performed. I didn't have a lot of, contacts outside the region because I hadn't developed any. So when things changed for newspapers and my job changed to basically freelancing occasionally, I thought, let's do some more of this. And so I got more involved again with the composition end of things, and was lucky to have a few successful performances, get a few pieces published. I won a prize in a competition, and things just started sort of taking off a little bit. And so that's where we are now. I'm really enjoying the ability to write for groups that I respect and love, and it's great to have my works performed outside the area, as I understand I'm going to have the pleasure of indulging in very soon.
Yeah. Well, that's
with your group.
Well, that's absolutely great. I always think it's fascinating where our interests lead us and how things develop.
Mm-hmm.
They develop in ways that we could never we could never imagine. And so it's fascinating to hear your story, and particularly to think about how your study of Middle English literature ties into this piece specifically that we'll be offering on Christmas Eve. There is no rose, which of course is coming out of sort of a Middle English tradition. Um, and and
Definitely.
so I was wondering, would you mind talking a little bit about this piece specifically, either about how the text resonated with you, or maybe even your approach to when you come at a text like this, maybe even informed by your study of Middle English?
Well, it's true that this is one of the crowning gems of its type in medieval English literature, particularly of that milieu, I guess I would say. And it's been wonderfully set by many composers, and it always takes a certain amount of nerve to approach a text that has, many successful settings elsewhere, some of them quite famous, and have a go at it. But for me, I wanted to see the piece unfold in a different way, a slightly different way. And so I abstracted the Latin commentary on the various developments and put it at the end instead of spacing it out and sort of sticking it in the middle of the Old English passages. For me, it sort of set a capstone on the lyrics, if you will, and it also it felt kind of like almost like an ascent to me. The various pieces of Latin that came in that I put at the end instead of where they originally were in the text, and so that was kind of my feeling. There would be a sense of kind of ascension in that last line, and luckily that seems to happen in a lot of performances.
Yeah, it really, and you get a sense of it in the shape of the piece, that you do have this sort of lush beginning with just a few sort of shimmering dissonances that are there, and then there's some harmonic tension that builds, and as we get to the end of the piece, it really does, these sort of towering chords that are sort of placed there as we go through those Latin responses that would have been there in the original, but that I don't know any other settings of it that take that sort of approach where almost kaleidoscopic, as we allow ourselves to sort of turn it and shift it and just see those four Latin refrains, the Alleluia and the Gaudeamus and Transeamus and everything, as we sort of
Right.
it builds to this journey to Bethlehem sort of feel. At least that's what I get from
That's a
it.
wonderful way to put it. That's exactly what I was hoping for. And it gives the chorus a great deal of scope, I think, because it asks them. I think it asks them to do a lot, and it's not always easy. But the choral responses that I've gotten so far have been really eloquent and elegant. So I'm always hopeful that's going to be the case.
Right, exactly. When you approach a text, what's your how do you what's your compositional approach when you're dealing with a piece of poetry? Do you find that the words, and I know for myself as a composer, it changes based on the text, um, I'm wondering if you have a consistent approach, or if you find different pieces call for different methods, whether it's mapping out or improvising at the piano, or whether you hear it in your head going in.
For me, the piano is kind of useless because it then becomes a piano piece. Because I'm such a piano person, I really have to get away from that instrument. So I use nothing when I compose. Often I'll compose on Sibelius, but without the sound playing, just because the notation is so neat, and you can do stuff with it. You can make a PDF with it. You can do all sorts of transmission with Sibelius, which is why I like it. But for me, it depends whether I wrote the text or didn't. And I've written several texts that I have set to music. And that to me is a totally different feeling than taking a pre-given text, however wonderful it is, and writing music to suit it. Because when you have a text that's yours, you can tinker with it a little bit more. You can you can say, oh, I really don't want that long vowel right there. What else? How else could I say this that would be better? And so that really works well, I think. And so I like the ability to tinker with, as I say, with the texts. But you have to think about the words and what they mean, and how that can be best translated into music, whether it's something that's rapturous, something that's cold, something that expresses worry or fear or enjoyment or hope or love. All these emotions are there in the text. You have to look for them and then see how you want to realize that. And I just sort of think for a long time, I guess is what I would say. But again, I stay off the piano. It is like a drug. It will drag you into pianism if you don't watch it.
That's one of the dangers that I have with it as well. And so,
I
yeah,
bet.
so I just try to
I've heard more than
back
one
away.
composer say, you really have to watch it, or you're going to be composing lovely piano pieces that aren't very singable.
Exactly. And when I first
Yeah.
started, that was an issue that I had, and finding that way to
Hmm.
balance what you're hearing and bring it into the world is always a challenge. But I think that it's wonderful to hear about this sort of resurgence of creative musical work that you've been able to do now that your life as a critic has shifted, and we're
Hmm.
really excited to be sharing this piece on Christmas Eve. And thank you so much for writing it, and also for taking the time to speak with me about it today. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I am thrilled that you've discovered it, and that I feel a piece is reborn every time it is reimagined and performed by a talented group of singers with an inspired leader. And I'm sure that will be the case on Christmas Eve. I will be thinking of you from far
Thank you
away.
so much, Melinda. Well, have a wonderful season, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thanks so much, and all the best to you as well. Okay, bye bye now.
I'm also pleased to share my newest composition, The Long Night, at the 9:30 p.m. choral prelude on Christmas Eve. The Long Night is a setting of an anonymous text from Mingulay of Beara, a remote island in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. This poem imagines the brightness of day in the midst of the winter solstice, a common metaphor used for Christ's arrival into the world, particularly in northern countries where the nights are particularly long, dark, and cold during the winter. I've tried to use the sing-song words of the poem to create a sense of the wind whispering outside, which slowly builds up into the shimmering chords that act as the work's climax. If you're looking for a place to celebrate Christmas, please feel welcome to come to St. David's. Our Christmas Eve services are at 4 p.m. with Christmas pageant and Eucharist, and at 10 p.m. with a 9:30 choral prelude, hymns, and a festival Eucharist. On Christmas Day, we have a 10 a.m. service with hymns, but wherever this holiday finds you, I hope it also brings you and those you love peace and joy. For Sundays in Song, I'm Doug Buchanan, and I look forward to singing with you.